Hold on. Well, I don't think Facebook's going to happen. I upgraded Zoom and now it's not giving me the option, the same options. Okay, we'll just share it later.
Good strategy.
All right.
Sam, as we're getting started, I'm wondering if you should disable your video. You're as a panelist this evening.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
Right. Well, we can get started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for this public meeting for the North Windham Moves Regional Mobility and Local Access public meeting. I'm Amanda Lassard. I'm the planning director for the town of Windham. The town has partnered with the Maine Department of Transportation to conduct a transportation study in North Windham. We've contracted with Gormal Palmer Consulting Engineers, and part of the study team is also North Star Planning. The study will complement previous planning efforts and evaluate potential improvement strategies to improve congestion and safety along the Route 302 corridor. So we have Ben Smith from North Star Planning and Don Ettinger from Gormal Palmer here tonight to present what we've heard so far, as we've been working on the study since it kicked off at the end of November 2020. We are recording this webinar to be posted later on the project website that's on the town's page, and we'll share it on Facebook. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. And in the Zoom format, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom. You can type in any questions, as things come to you during the webinar, and we will read those aloud as we go. Or if you hold tight until the end, you can use the raise hand function and we will call on people as we get to it. Or if you're on the phone, you just press *9 to raise your hand, and we'll remind you of those instructions at the end. So I'll turn it over to Ben and Don. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Amanda. Ben, if you could maybe pull up the slideshow, that would be great. Well, thank you, everyone, and good evening. Hopefully this is not brand new to you and that you've been on the town's website, which does provide a lot of information regarding the ongoing planning study. This is the agenda that we have for you tonight. So we're kind of doing a check-in with the public tonight. And we want to present some of the input we've received from the public to date, but also as an opportunity to get additional comments. So Amanda just did the welcoming notes. I'll talk briefly about the project purpose and maybe a bit about the background. And then I'll hand it over to Ben to discuss a bit on some of the results that we're finding from the online survey. And we'll open it up to Q&A thereafter. Next. So looking at this graphic here, for folks that have been on the town's website, this should look familiar to you. This is our study area map. And it's important to note, and Ben, I don't know that I would have, yeah, if you maybe want to get a laser pointer, there you go, perfect. I wanted to note to everybody that north is not up on this graphic. North is to the left where Ben's cursor is. So the Route 302 corridor runs right to left on the screen. Booty's Corner is pretty much in the middle of the screen. There you go. So to the south, you head to Portland. River Road is to the south. To the north, you're heading up to Raymond, and White's Bridge Road is our northern limit of the study. Generally speaking, this study limit matches the downtown district, but it's not exact. But that's the area that we're focused in on this assignment. Next slide. So what is the purpose of this study? So every study that we embark on, it's important to establish a purpose and need statement, which we do have, and I think it's probably available on the town's website. This slide here provides a summary of the purpose and need. Really what we're looking at is mobility, and it's two forms of mobility. It's for the local traffic as well as the regional traffic. So regionally, we want to make sure that we maintain and improve on mobility through this study area and improve on the safety. And we'll go into a little more detail there. But locally, we also want to improve on accessibility to the businesses in the North Windham region for the locals. So we really want to balance those two needs. And it goes without saying, but it's important to note that we're looking at all modes of transportation. It's just not vehicles. We're going to be looking at bikes and pedestrians and transit service. Our focus as we look at mobility will be potentially new connector roads. These roads would provide access maybe to the backside of the Route 302 corridor and help with locals getting access to the businesses on the corridor where they may not have to use Route 302 to get to those businesses. We're also going to take a look at access management as it relates to the state roads and the existing infrastructure that's out there, particularly Route 302, Route 35, and 115. And we'll be looking at the intersections throughout the study area. Some of the known issues that exist within this study area, traffic backups, both in travel lanes, but also turning lanes. That's well documented, and we don't think it's getting any better. So hopefully our recommendations with this study will allow for some implementation and improvements on those backups. We're also aware that there's really no good bike or walking options in this study area. So that is a focus of ours to make some recommendations to enhance and improve on bike and ped accommodations. And it's important that we align our transportation recommendations that come out of this study with the land use goals and the economic development goals of North Windham, creating a better quality of place. So that's something that's really important both to the town and to our study team. Next. So a bit of background on our study. It's important to note that this is what we call a PPI study. It's a planning partnership initiative between the town and the DOT. So there's shared funding in this study. Why is that important and why are we embarking on this study? Well, we want this study to be supported both locally from the public and from the town, but also we want some support from DOT at the state level. As you know, Route 302 is a state road. So getting their support and the recommendations that come out of this study can lead to additional funding on those recommendations as we look to implement some of the outcomes of this study. So this is a transportation planning study. We'll be looking at traffic operations, safety and mobility through the study area. And we definitely want to build on past planning efforts. As many of you know, this North Windham has been studied to death for the last 25 years. And there have been service road studies that have been done. The 21st Century Plan is probably one of the more recent studies that's been completed and I think supported and approved as a master plan by the town. And more recently, even a comprehensive plan. So next slide. So we want to take those studies and build on the good ideas from those studies, but we're certainly open to new ideas. And so hopefully through the public process, we can get some other ideas. Traffic and safety conditions continue to deteriorate. We're aware of that. It's not getting any better. And one promise that we made to the town when we pursued this study is we want the goals and outcomes of this study to be supported by the public and the agencies, town, as well as DOT. So the results of the study don't end up being, let's do another study. We really want the outcomes of this study to be something that can be supported and implemented moving forward. That's really important as we move forward because it isn't getting any better. It's also important to note that our focus of the study is really on the northern end of the study limits. That would be north of Route 115. That's primarily where your commercial district is and where we're seeing the heavier traffic congestions. Next slide. So I think from there, that's a quick intro. I'd like to hand it over to Ben to discuss a bit about the online survey and maybe what we're starting to hear.
Great, thank you, Don. Ben Smith, North Star Planning. As Don had indicated, we've had a number of activities taking place so far, reaching out to folks that have involved communications with town officials. We've had meeting with the town council. We've also done some targeted stakeholder outreach, have the small group conversations. And from there, we launched a very early online survey back in March, very general. We wanted to ask questions about how people felt things had changed over the last 10 years, ideas and perceptions about future challenges. And we're now getting into some scenario work. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that is as we talk about what we've heard so far. But the goal of this is to get some specific feedback on a range of considerations as opposed to more general types of conditions and attitudes, so that we can get some confirmation of community values and priorities, building, as Don said, on the good planning work that's been done in the past. So the next couple slides talk about the survey in March. And essentially, when we ask what's changed, as Don kind of gave a little spoiler a couple moments ago, traffic is getting heavier. Traffic and transportation issues have gotten worse in the last 10 years. That's a feeling from the community. And specifically, there's a sense that seasonal traffic, whether it's, in particular, the Friday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, seasonal traffic in the summertime, and also to a lesser degree in winter, are going to be have changed in the last 10 years. When we think about looking ahead, the biggest challenges seem to be trying to balance that local and regional mobility. This is, in other words, the balance between people who are traveling through North Windham from Portland and places south, going to places in the Lakes region and beyond, and balancing that traffic with people who need to access North Windham for jobs, for shopping, and all of the other services that are available in North Windham. Right along with that is concerns about traffic growth, continuation of the trend with heavier and heavier traffic throughout this year, but also again seasonal. And so we also asked a final question about what has not been addressed in past planning that really we might want to take a closer look at as we go forward. One of the more interesting comments to come out of that had to do with drive-through facilities and how traffic from drive-throughs is impacting 302 traffic. Sometimes the drive-through traffic is backed right out onto 302. And we've had some discussions about that, and it's kind of an open question, I think, at this point, whether it's an ongoing chronic issue or to what extent COVID, restaurant closures, and the heavier reliance on drive-throughs are impacting those kinds of things that people are seeing. So it's certainly an issue, and it's interesting to think about the longer-term implications of that. Also, I think one of the interesting things that people have said that we should be thinking about deal with the lack of transportation alternatives. It's very auto-oriented and specifically very car-oriented type of environment on 302 and in North Windham, as well as, again, that balance of how do you handle local traffic with through traffic and regional traffic. So we took all of that information from the town conversations, the small group work we did, and that March survey, and started to frame up a larger, more comprehensive set of ideas to present to folks. And we're doing that through scenario planning. And scenario planning is really based on the idea that it's impossible to predict the future accurately in a place as complex as North Windham. And, you know, we may have ideas. It's hard to look into the crystal ball. So the idea is to come up with a number of different plausible, realistic future scenarios that we can evaluate improvements against, so that ultimately we can make some determinations, hopefully, about what works under a wide range of possible alternatives. What are the most valuable interventions across a number of different ways that the future might shape up? What's good, what's bad about each scenario? So we have developed 3 scenarios that look at those, you know, types of independent future conditions, and they're not sequential. It's not a first A, then B, then C kind of situation. They're really meant to be standalone alternative ideas that, you know, could happen. So as we think about these different ways that the transportation network could develop and land use patterns could develop, the kinds of things that we'll be thinking about would shape those things as well. So one of the things we try to let people know is that there's no right answer. There's no scenario where you have to pick one that you like the best and you're voting for one of these scenarios. The idea is that there are going to be things that you like probably in each one of these, and there's going to be things that you might not like in each one of these. And we're going to be working to go through the public input, the written comments, what we hear from folks, and try and get a better sense of how we can mix and match different types of interventions and put those together into a final set of recommendations that are going to be effective no matter what the future brings. So the first scenario, I'm going to walk through each one of these scenarios, just give you a little bit of a flavor for what these are. And I am going to take a little time to do this because it's important for people to know that we've had the questionnaire open associated with these surveys up on Facebook and on the town's project page for a couple weeks now. So this is what we're basing the information on that we're going to be presenting tonight, but you will have a chance for the next week up until May 20th or so to take what you hear this evening and provide your own input as well if you haven't had a chance to do that yet. So scenario A is a Route 302 focus kind of scenario. It's a scenario that's focused on consistent traffic flow on Route 302 throughout the study area from the Portland end down just south of River Road all the way through Booty's Corner and up through the Whitesbridge Road, Anglers Road intersection. It restricts left turn lanes at signalized intersections only, in particular between Booty's Corner and Franklin Drive, which is the traffic signal that goes into Home Depot. And it makes major improvements for pedestrians, bikes, streetscape improvements. And the goal is to tame Route 302 so that it is a more comfortable, safer place to walk, to navigate on a bicycle, add more quality of place elements to the streetscape while preserving as much vehicular capacity on 302 as possible. So part of this scenario is making the Lakes Region Explorer bus stop. It's currently in the parking lot near the movie theater in Hannaford, bringing that to 302, making that more visible, more accessible. Land use is likely to remain focused on Route 302 as the main arterial, and to a lesser extent, Route 115 going toward Gray and 35 going toward Standish. Over time, new buildings will be built closer to 302, but the focus will still be on Route 302 as North Windham's main street. So presenting that scenario, giving people a chance to react to that, it did seem like in the results we've received so far, that there is relatively strong support for pedestrian, bike, and streetscape improvements on 302, which are represented by these sets of columns. These pedestrian strongly support, slightly support in blue and red respectively, bicycle and streetscape, as well as for the more operational kinds of ideas about left turns and access management, which is closing or consolidating driveways. Here's closing driveways and here's left turns. But there really was a lot of neutral feelings, kind of more middle of the road kind of feelings when it comes to the idea of reducing traffic speed. People didn't have a strong sense that that was the right thing to do on 302 so far. And neutral feelings about the Lakes Region bus stop. So moving into scenario B, which is a scenario that's more focused on connector roads. Local connector roads is what we called it. And the idea is that there would be a couple new connector roads with a focus on local access around North Windham. One would be located between Franklin Drive, which is that road to Home Depot, once again, connecting out to 115 in some kind of alignment. And the other one would essentially be a continuation of Manchester Drive through Whitesbridge Road, finishing that road, if you will, extending that road out to Whitesbridge. These new roads would include sidewalks and shoulders for people to bike and walk. Could include accommodations off-street as well, if you could think of multi-use pathways. In many communities around Southern Maine, they're typically paved and allow folks to walk and bike. There's a great one in South Windham, the Mountain Division Trail, as well as focusing on more local traffic that would enable 302 to focus more on a job of carrying through traffic. That regional traffic would remain on 302, and these would new roads would provide connections for accessing the back of properties, providing local alternatives to 302, so you don't, as a Windham resident or someone in the area, you don't need to get on 302 for every single trip you need to make in North Windham. And with these roads, you would probably start to see some diffusion away from 302 from a land use perspective as some of these properties get new road frontage and start to do a little bit more diverse types of activities, both residential and commercial. So after presenting that scenario, we did get some input on a couple questions here. One is regarding support for a local connector on the north side of 115, which is the east side of 302. So east of 302 is the Franklin Drive, Home Depot, Hannaford side of 302. With this orange color is strongly support, this blue color is support, and the green is neutral. And when we asked the same question about a connector on the west side of 302, which is the Lowe's, Manchester Drive, Whitesbridge Road side of 302, it's fairly similar. And these numbers have changed a little bit even in the last few days. But it is very consistent with what you're seeing for percentages here. So there is some community support for these ideas about a connector road. And there are ideas about what that road might look like as well. I think that there's it's less clear, less consensus about what that would look like, but there are ideas that people have about especially strong support for an off-street multi-use trail as opposed to a primary reliance on sidewalks and shoulders on this road. So the final scenario, which I'll describe briefly once again, is more of a local downtown street network, is how we described it on the website. And the idea is that there would be the creation not only of more connections from between the larger roads, but the focus of this scenario is really about a local fine-grained street network with a true street hierarchy. So rather than a reliance primarily on arterials and large state roads, there'd be smaller roads that would allow for connections within North Windham that would be narrower, slower, maybe even primarily pedestrian oriented. But the idea is that in this scenario, North Windham would be the kind of place that you could drive to or take a bus to and then park and have lots of good options and alternative routes that you could walk. And you'll see that the street network also breaks up some of these larger properties so that you're likely to find narrower street fronts, more fine-grained land use, as well as transportation network. And it defines North Windham, I think, as a place using the transportation network. The idea of transit is a key part of this scenario, and North Windham, more than just hosting a bus stop for Lakes Region Explorer, it might be a full transit hub with an extension of the Metro, which is the regional bus service out of Portland, providing more regular weekday traffic as opposed to a Lakes Region kind of commuter weekday only kind of scenario. Such a station would also provide options around van pool service, such as the services available to commuters going to Augusta and the large employment center up there, as well as Bath and other regional employment destinations. So again, this scenario is focused on a fine-grained local street network. And what we found is that people are really, when it comes to transit, are very interested in more of a metro type bus service with this kind of scenario. And you will notice that we had some kind of neutral feelings about transit in scenario A. When we talk about transit in a scenario C with a different kind of road network, metro type services would be preferable to folks who filled out the survey so far, as opposed to smaller scale van service or more on-demand type transit. And we also asked a question about how do you get a local street network? Do you let private development build the streets necessary to serve their own projects as development happens? Or does the town take a more proactive role in either providing clear standards and street design requirements, or even beyond that, proactively designing and building local streets? And I think that what we're getting from these results is that generally people feel that the town should be more active, more proactive, rather than letting street network develop as development happens. So at this point, we will be able to refer back to these, and we'll have some time for Q&A, and we can revisit some of these, especially the graphics, if that'd be helpful. But I'd like to turn it back over to Don for next steps.
Thank you, Ben. So the next 3 months will be important for us in this study. We're trying to collect data, public input data today, but we also have, as Ben mentioned, a little bit of an extension on the online survey. So if you haven't completed it, we encourage you to go there and complete it over the next week or so. So we'll be collecting that data and reviewing it, but then we really want to start on evaluating future scenarios. So we've kind of outlined a scenario A, B, and C, but depending on input will guide us as to what we should be looking at. But we want to start looking at some scenarios. That scenario evaluation will include traffic modeling and analysis. It will look at access management. We'll look at high crash locations within the corridor. We'll be looking at new connector road locations, where they might tie into local streets. So we'd like to progress those aspects of the study further along. We really haven't done much of that aside from what you've seen with the graphics to date. And then from there, we'll take a look at an evaluation matrix. How are we going to compare each of the alternatives or the scenarios against each other, and compare it to maybe a no-build scenario if we don't do anything. We'll compare those scenarios to the purpose and need statement. I mean, it's really important on a study like this that we define a purpose and need statement, but then when we develop these scenarios, how well do they meet the purpose and need? How well do they, accomplish the things that are important in the study? So we'd like to do those types of things over the next 3 months or so. And so May, June, July-ish, we'd like to come back to the public and present what we're finding. How well do each of the scenarios meet the purpose and need, and which ones meet the purpose and need the best? And get some input from the public as to, are we on the right track in terms of defining these recommendations? And then thereafter, we would develop a report, a draft and a final report. And ultimately, the goal is to get consensus and support on some recommendations from the study so the town can move forward with an implementation plan. They'd like to start doing design and permitting on some of these alternatives. And so you can see that ideally starting at the conclusion of this study. So I think if we go to the next slide, I think we're done with our presentation, and we can open it up to questions. Amanda, there you go.
Yeah, so there are a couple of written questions that were submitted, just if we'd like to answer those live. Someone asked in the results that you were referring to about how many responses had you received from the survey thus far?
We've got about 60 results so far.
And the question was the overall support of scenario C?
Well, again, we didn't ask people to pick one or vote for the scenario they like best. We presented these scenarios with the idea that we would be asking questions about the elements that make each scenario unique and distinct from the others. And those are the things that we're trying to get a sense of. So I talked a little bit about some of those. Some focus much more on transit. Some focus much more on pedestrian activity. Some focus on local connector roads. Some focus on 302 as it exists today. So each one of those little pieces from each scenario are the things that we're trying to get some sense of. This isn't a pick the scenario you like best. I think this is going to be a mix and match kind of scenario. Scenario is not the right word. A mix and match exercise where we look at the scenarios and based on public comment, based on the engineering data that Don and his team are going to be looking at, going to combine that all into a set of draft recommendations.
Another question that was, how will the costs of each of the alternatives be evaluated and presented?
Yeah, so I figured the question would be, what do these cost? And we don't know that. So we will develop construction costs. So we're going to develop conceptual plans. We'll probably develop on aerial images, but there'll be concept level plan view graphics that will help inform us on where improvements need to be made. And then we will basically develop what we call a construction cost estimate. It will be a planning level construction cost estimate, but basically we'll put numbers, we'll figure out quantities, unit pricing, and we'll come up with some costs. And we will likely do total project costs. So we'll take a look at not only what does it cost to construct it, but also take a look at what the engineering costs and permitting costs might be, the survey costs, inspection during construction costs, and maybe even right-of-way costs. So we'll take a look at a holistic view of it and come up with a total project cost. The cost may be broken up into alternatives. So it might look at what do we want to do on 302? What do we want to do on 302 north of Booty's Corner versus south of Booty's Corner? It may look at a new connector road that's on the west side or the east side. And it may look at phasing of those that we may not, be able to afford everything at once, but what would it be a good phasing plan to take a look at, and where do we get our most bang for our buck? So that will all be part of the thought process and the discussion kind of as we start to evolve and come up with some initial recommendations from the planning study.
Thanks, Don. Another written question was, how will the new roads relieve main 302 traffic that backs all the way up to around the River Road intersection? Is there a consideration to increase speeds on 302 and remove traffic lights if local traffic will go on the connector roads anyway?
So I think everything's on the table. The idea being that if we can pull traffic, it may sound a bit unusual, but if we can start pulling traffic that's local traffic that has to get access at Booty's Corner, for instance, to use 302 to get to businesses, north or south, if we can pull some of that traffic onto the local roads, that in theory reduces the volume of traffic at the intersections, but also on the corridor itself. And you'd be amazed that just pulling it off a certain intersection, how it might affect the corridor itself and the operations of the corridor. Not to lose sight of this, kind of separate from this study, but something that the town has embarked on, is looking at the entire signal system along 302 and looking to incorporate a smart signal system where it's more of a reactive, live type of adjustments based on the demand. So we think the recommendations from the study, as well as incorporating some new technology on the signal system, should help better control and better manage traffic through that corridor. We do feel that if we are able to pull traffic off 302, local traffic, to use the connector roads, that it will have an overall benefit on 302, including as far south as the River Road intersection. Was it a two-part question or was it just one? What was the second question?
What about increasing speeds on 302 and removing traffic lights if all the local traffic would go on connector roads?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't been fielded that question in the past. So removal of signals, that certainly could be a topic of discussion, depending on what the recommendations are and what we're seeing for volumes. There may be, depending on the recommendations, the addition of new signals at strategic locations. So we will take a look at that through the corridor. In terms of increasing of speeds, I'm not sure that will be something. Let me clarify. Increasing of speed limits, I'm not sure that would be something that would be a recommendation out of the study. In order to change a speed limit on a road, I believe state or local, usually the Department of Transportation would need to do a speed study to determine what is a safe speed based on volumes and based on the surrounding area. So we wouldn't necessarily be recommending a speed limit change, but you do have the opportunity to get through the corridor. As the town manager has said, during a Thursday night, it gets very, very busy and takes you 45 minutes to go a mile. So if we're pulling some of that local traffic off that corridor, it will increase your speed or your time to get through the study area.
If I could add on to that real quickly, scenario A had in the description I gave was to slow traffic down, make it safer, more comfortable for pedestrians to use 302. And in the more detailed scenario description that's on the project webpage at the town website, it does talk about removing a signal or two. It doesn't specify which. Like Don said, it's going to depend on what the traffic numbers show. But in that scenario, traffic flow would be more constant, slower, maybe less lights. As this in scenario B and C, where there's less and less emphasis on 302 for local traffic trips, those are the more likely opportunities in those scenarios where vehicle speed could be maintained, where you'd have more of a focus on through traffic on 302 as opposed to scenario A, which is 302 trying to do all of those jobs of through traffic as well as local traffic.
So we have a couple of live questions. So I'm going to allow Greta to ask a question, I think. Here we go. Greta, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I have a couple of different concerns. My first concern is I read through the plan from 2013. And it's great to see what's being planned. I've been looking forward to something like this for a long time, and it's so exciting to see this finally coming. But I was noticing there doesn't seem to be, at least on that plan, actual allocated bike lanes, and I'm not sure if that was just something that didn't show up in that plan. I didn't get to the 2017 plan, but what your plans are for that, and also how far they're gonna go, like how much farther past the study area. So are you going to go down farther 302, maybe towards like Tractor Supply, or farther, or down any other roads? Is that a possibility?
So Greta, I'll answer by, it is a possibility as long as the shoulder widths on the roads beyond our study limits could accommodate bike lanes. So accommodating bike lanes and shoulders is in some cases as simple as adding some striping in the shoulders and maybe some signing. So we've done similar studies in other parts of the state where we've accommodated bikes within the study limits. And the way we traditionally would handle it is we would try to accommodate bikes in the corridor and potentially in shoulders, 5-foot shoulders. And then at our limits of work, we would transition them into a shared lane scenario. Now we can only do that if the speeds allow for it, because obviously bikes do not necessarily, there's a limit of how fast a bicycle will go compared to traffic. So those are some of the things that we'll look at, but our goal is to try to improve and provide for bicycle accommodations within our study limits.
So just one more thing. There's some evidence from what I've been reading from other sources that bike lanes, unprotected bike lanes, are not necessarily dangerous, but they appear dangerous, so people don't use them, especially on a very busy road like 302. And I was reading about this really neat a prototype that was just created where it was barriers that were pretty small, that were made out of old tires. So they were like broken down old tires, and you could like put plants in the middle of them. So they had reflective paint on the side. If you look it up, you'll find them. They're tire bike guards, and they would, I feel like that would encourage people to bike so much more, because you know, you're talking so much about traffic, and really the only way to get rid of car traffic like that is to provide other ways of transportation. So for example, like the buses, that's really exciting. If you're gonna add more support for metro stuff, but really when it comes down to it, if buses get stuck in traffic just like cars, then the only people that are going to ride them are the people that don't have a car and don't have any other options, and like that's fine. But if we want to encourage a lot of people to use these buses, providing a bus lane is really important and is actually used in a lot of different cities to really great effect. Putting in some stoplights that actually, I know I'm kind of rambling here and I apologize for that, but I've been reading a ton about a lot of this transportation stuff. I'm actually doing a project in school right now about the impacts of biking and other transportation on roads and in cities, like cities with them versus cities without them, and the pollution that they remove, and just a much greener, nicer area to be in. and safe, like a very safe area. So I know I just throw a lot of stuff at you, but if that's, especially the guarded bike lanes, if that's an option, that would be really, really great for everybody.
Yep. Greta, you have great comments. Sounds like you need to be on our study team. So what I will tell you is the guarded bike lanes that you're referencing, I think the technical term might be buffered bike lanes.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a stripe in the road that separates the bikes from the vehicles. There's a buffer, and it could be a physical buffer. It could be just a wider striped area, maybe 2 feet, 3 feet, but it provides more separation. It's a buffer. But sometimes in Portland, you'll see that they'll do a buffered bike lane separating bikes from vehicles. They'll do it with a wider striped area, but then they'll actually put in some flexible delineators in there. So, the planter boxes, those are great ideas, but we can't put something in there that's going to be a hazard if they get hit by the vehicles. The alternative would be maybe some flexible delineators. Gets a bit more challenging in the wintertime when you try to plow things. Sometimes there'll be a raised island separating the two. So those are definitely all things on the table. One of the challenges that we have in this particular corridor of 302 is just the raw width of the road. It's multi-lane facility with narrow shoulders, and it's somewhat challenging to even get a 5-foot shoulder for bikes, let alone a 7 or an 8 or something larger shoulder width that's buffered. So one thing that we're thinking about is, for the bike accommodations, are we better off doing something that's off street that accommodates bikes with some type of multi-use trail that runs parallel to, but maybe not directly on the street, but maybe behind the businesses going up through the corridors.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, those are some of the ideas we're thinking of. But your comments are really important to us, so thank you for those.
Oh, and just one more thing. I know I've been going on for a long time here, but something that would be really amazing, just in terms of biking. I know it's not an option right now, but just something to think about. Maybe we have that wonderful snowmobile trail that's used all winter round, and it goes through a significant portion of the town. What if we did something where we paved a section of it, kind of like the Mount Division Trail, so that it then became a full year thing? I don't know if I thought of that one day. I live right near the pipeline, and I was like, that would be a really cool addition to kind of connect even more of Windham. And I think it would be, you wouldn't have to pave it or you wouldn't have to plow it in the winter because people use it, snowmobiles, so they can get around a lot in the winter, but it would become a full year way for people to experience a lot more of the town and not really be on roads that much. I mean, if you think about the Mount Division Trail.
So I think you're starting to talk about a connection or an overlap between the town's open space plan and this effort, which is more of the transportation plan. And I'm sure, I won't volunteer Amanda, but I'm sure she would be happy to have a conversation about that. That open space plan is on the town website as well. But to your first point about how to accommodate bikes, and I think that this is really at its core the challenge we're trying to retrofit an existing roadway like 302 versus the things that Dawn had mentioned. There might be opportunities, whether it's on a new local street or a connector road or even a separated multi-use path, kind of like the Mountain Division. There are opportunities, those are at least on the table as active considerations. Scenario A is about retrofitting primarily in that regard, and scenarios B and C have a little more connections that not even all of those lines on the plan could be streets. Maybe some of those are trails or pathways that would provide less about vehicular connections and more about connections between properties.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks. All right. There are a couple of questions about how are any of these scenarios going to consider the future potential sewer expansion in North Windham?
Yeah, I guess I'll take a stab at it. They are, yes and no, not specific to this study, but they're ongoing efforts. They're happening at the same time. We're working with town staff that are dealing with both of those. So we want to make sure that there's synergy between the sewer project and this transportation study. We think they are linked. We think that it is important that the recommendations that come out of this study will be supported by the sewer plans and vice versa. So while we don't have a direct role in it, the town is making sure that there's collaboration be happening between this study and that project.
So there was a few questions about kind of creating, turning 302 into a more visually appealing boulevard style layout and putting utilities underground. So there's several questions around kind of beautification of the corridor and, you know, is there consideration to kind of those sorts of improvements?
Yeah, I'll start first on scenarios have been developed, and again, scenario A was really focused heavily on streetscape, pedestrian accommodations. The description on the town website of the scenario talks about benches, trees, pedestrian scale lighting, those kinds of things that I think the word I used earlier was it would tame 302, make it a much more comfortable, safe place to walk and spend time, a place where you maybe want to take a walk at lunch, that kind of scenario. But that being said, none of the scenarios are turning their back on 302. I think even where scenario B is talking about connector roads and scenario 3 is talking more about a local street network around 302. I think in any of those regards, improvements could be made on 302, certainly. And like I said, the idea is to mix and match. And so far, there's been very strong support for those kinds of concepts that are talked about specifically in scenario A, but could become a part of recommendations no matter how different scenarios are supported or developed over the next few weeks.
So there's a question about, is there a way to just connect the businesses on the east side of 302 without new roads being built? That would still avoid having to go out onto 302 to get from Cumberland Farms to KFC to Obashan and Hannaford?
Yeah, that was a big focus of the 2013 21st Century Plan and some of the work that followed, kind of formalizing access ways through parking lots, formalizing pathways from some of the residential areas off of, for example, Sandbar Road, and how would you, wouldn't it be great if you could walk from there over to the grocery store or the movie theater? Wouldn't it be great to have some more coordinated access between, where the Planet Fitness and the post office is over to Obashan and even over to Hannaford. So those were ideas that were explored more along the lines, I would say, along that building a local street network. And those connections might even be things that wouldn't meet the street standard today, just maybe very narrow, one car in each direction at a time kind of thing. And it would really be on a neighbor to neighbor, project to project kind of basis, as people are willing and see a need and opportunity. So I think some of those concepts are carried over in scenario C, which is a local street network, except some of those things would be more formalized into a street as opposed to we're going to make a new driveway or an informal access way between the dentist office and the real estate office. It would be a real street with some lights and sidewalks and maybe on-street parking, those kinds of things. So scenario C is also talking about a street hierarchy. So there may very well be those kinds of one way or one car at a time or alley type streets that wouldn't be a full, even small local street, but having options and a diversity of street types adds more options when it comes to land use and when it comes to the ability of a place to serve multiple trips. We talked about traffic reduction. One way to do that is to drive to a place and park your car and do 5 or 4 or 6 things at once, and then get back in your car and head to your house, as opposed to I used to have to go to TD Bank and I would drive over to Subway, even though you can almost throw a baseball from the ATM to Subway. So it just isn't the kind of place you would walk. But you feel a little silly sometimes taking the car because it's not that far. So scenario C is more about having a more fine-grained street network that would allow for a diversity of options that you could chain some of those trips together.
So there are some comments we're seeing on Facebook that seem to be people voting for different scenarios. So just to reiterate, since if people joined in late, that if you haven't responded to the survey, it's really getting input on various elements. And I will answer this other question was, how do I find the survey? And you didn't have that on your slide. So if you'll just bear with me, I'll remind people that, so this is the actual direct page, but windhammaine.us, it's a /729/north-windham/move. So, but you can find this by navigating to the planning department's page, and it's over here on the sidebar. So the survey is open for the week. I think your comments here, if you haven't answered the survey, we'd appreciate you responding to the survey so we can incorporate that feedback more easily into the process. I think, and then there was a follow-up on the comment about the increasing the speeds, that it seemed to be in reference to north of the Franklin Drive intersection, where people do tend to drive over the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit anyway. There's a question about the walkability goal. The corridor is a strip mall with businesses far apart. Is the belief that creating walkability through a traffic plan will enable higher density shops, restaurants, etc.?
On its own, putting sidewalks on both sides of 302, making sure that every intersection has got crosswalks at each street that goes into the intersection. Those are things that don't exist today. And if those were in place by the end of the summer, that alone would not create that fine-grained or increase the diversity of uses. It wouldn't hurt, but I think alone it's part of the ingredients that would go into that. But the idea here is, someone had also mentioned, sewer is an important part of what happens with land use. Transportation network will shape land use. Other infrastructure, broadband to a certain extent, but sewer to a very great extent will shape land use. The types of things that you can do, the intensity of things you can do, the density of commercial uses and residential uses. And as Don said, we're drafting up these scenarios, and we're going to be putting recommendations together in the context of some ongoing sewer planning. But this effort is we're not trying to plan the land use. We're focusing on North Windham as a place from the perspective of transportation. Scenario A is, maybe as the comment was focused, is really about what can you do in 302 to make 302 more walkable and pedestrian friendly. The other scenarios start to focus on some of those other options that would be available in those scenarios. So it's not just focusing on 302 at that point. And
it looks like the last two items in the Q&A box are really just comments about some issues in the corridor, about widening the road by White's Bridge Road because that's where traffic backs up, and concerns about dangerous walking down 115 crossing the bridge.
Walking down 115 toward the bridge, is that the Route 35 towards Standish? Over the Presumpscot?
I would assume 115 down at Millbrook, which is that a little outside of the study area? Or
yeah, Ditch Brook is just outside. It's in it's very close, but it's just outside.
So that's the end of the questions that people had typed in. If there's any further questions, if you'd like to raise your hand, now's your chance. I think that's it, guys. So encourage you to respond to the survey.
Yeah, if you haven't completed the survey, please do so. That's very helpful to us and informative. And thank you all for participating tonight and joining on this Zoom call.
Yeah. I love the questions, love the energy. Thank you.
Yep. We'll be in touch and continue to look at the website. It will be up as we have things to update you on. We will be using the website as a tool for that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Have a good evening.